Joel Coen's film, The Tragedy of Macbeth, is a movie released in 2021 based on Shakespeare's renowned play, Macbeth. The film was nominated for 3 Oscars: Best Actor, Best Cinematography, and Best Production Design, respectively. Though I only have some general knowledge in the fields of both acting and cinematography, the production and set design is what I want to discuss, since it is something I have more knowledge about, and because it was, in my humble opinion, truly one of the most prominent parts of the movie and what made it stand out. So with that, please enjoy my badly laid out analysis of The Tragedy of Macbeth's production design and why it was so good. Watching this film for the first time, I expected a very typical remake. Honestly, when my brother told me that he wanted to watch, quote-unquote, the Macbeth adaptation, what I had in mind were those adaptations from the early 2000s, like Stardust or Inkheart. Was this close-minded of me? Yes, it was, considering the fact that it's been a good 20 years since the early 2000s, and new developments in technology in the field of filmmaking has made it easier to create higher quality movies. Don't get me wrong, I really do love the book-to-movie adaptations from that era. It's just that I was expecting something a little more like those adaptations. To be fair, some films and adaptations these days look like they were made with zero budget, conveniently modernized, script a little on the cheesy side, subpar VFX, garish clothing that was done by a costume designer who very clearly values artistic liberty over historical accuracy, the works. But I was proven wrong. This movie encapsulates some darker themes that make the film feel very murky and very heavy. Macbeth was originally written as a play, a piece to be performed on stage. This aspect was carried over into the film in the best way possible. The original Shakespearean script was maintained, which gave the movie such a gritty feeling that really draws the audience in. This dark and heavy tone was beautifully enhanced by the way the film was rendered in black and white. This made the overall air of the film darker and heavier without having to actually desaturate and darken the film's color grading to a painfully obnoxious extent. To be fair, removing the color from the film doesn't necessarily make it quote-unquote easy watching, since the tragedy of Macbeth is quite difficult to digest as it is. If anything, the black and white makes the movie a little bit harder to watch, but by making the decision to have the film done in monochrome, Joel Coen made the viewing experience not exactly more enjoyable, but definitely more intriguing. Color is something often used in film to convey a theme, a mood, or an idea. Colors represent different things depending on how the designers want them to be interpreted. The problem is, one color can be interpreted in several different ways. There's a psychology behind it. Blue can represent calmness and comfort, or sadness and despair. Green can stand for jealousy or a fresh start. Red could symbolize anger or high energy. The list could go on. Perhaps to make sure that there would be no confusion on the audience's part concerning the interpretation of color, Coen had the film done in a style that was unmistakably dark in theme, both literally and figuratively. Of course, there are occasions where the opposite is done, intentionally using bright colors as a means to delude from the dark subject matter of the film, such as is done in movies like We Need to Talk About Kevin or Midsommar. Both movies have a deceptively bright color palette, creating a sense of security, a safety net of sorts for the audience. A safety net that turns out to be a sticky spider web, and the audience finds themselves trapped in what initially presented itself as quote-unquote safe. It's utilized horrifyingly well in these cases, since it makes for an environment that is so bright and soft and light that it seems like nothing can possibly go wrong. This way, when something does inevitably go wrong, such as is the case in movies in this genre, it shatters the viewer's illusion that nothing bad can possibly happen in broad daylight. This was obviously not the case for The Tragedy of Macbeth. The original play was written with a very dark aura with little room for light and comic relief. It's likely that Cohn took this into account when making the film. The black and white motif throws the viewer directly into a dark, foreboding headspace. No room to breathe, no false sense of security, just heavy, suffocating, anxious darkness. Another reason that the monochrome film was such a brilliant decision was that not only did this lessen the amount of visual processing that the audience would have to do, but it made for such a beautiful opportunity to play with lighting. The lighting in this film is very dramatic and very moody. It was like watching moving paintings. The clear shapes that the lights and the shadows make would be more likely to be overlooked had the film been shot in full color. The set itself contributes to the mood and the lighting. The whole world of the tragedy of Macbeth is built very cleverly. Watching it for the first time, I was thrown off. It looked more like a high-budget theater production rather than a set design for a movie. The way the sets were built weren't done in the typical European baronial architecture as it would be if they were trying to do the film in a more historically accurate style, but rather in a more brutalist fashion, with very bare, cold facades and high structures. According to the production designer, Stéphane Deschamps, Joel Cohn himself said that he wanted, quote, not a castle, but an idea of a castle, end quote. The whole world looked so theatrical, almost cartoonishly third-dimensional. This almost anti-realistic take gave it a very vaguely dreamlike and nearly nightmarish quality that is unique to this film. Every single set, every scene was somehow perfectly abstract. The architecture reminded me somewhat of works done by Jared Pike. If you aren't familiar with Jared Pike, he's a 3D artist whose work I love and admire. I personally have a strange obsession with liminal space, weird core, dream core, and similar aesthetics. All of these aesthetics center around combining comforting and familiar images with strange, unsettling, or upsetting images in order to make the viewer feel as if they are in a dream. One of the sub-aesthetics or subcultures attached to these is poolcore, or more specifically, the dream pools, a series of pictures or pieces done by Jared Pike depicting these vast, eerie, and hauntingly empty indoor pools. The very minimalistic geometric themes of the architecture and the bright lighting are what I distinctly remembered when I saw the sets in the tragedy of Macbeth. Both cleverly play with the shapes and the lighting to create an aura for the environment. The most incredible part of all this was the fact that rather than taking away from the historical thriller, the more modern and abstract take on the production design managed to add to the immersion of the audience into the film. It was abstract, yes, but not to the point that it was rudely detracting from the historical aspect of the movie. The simplicity of the sets perfectly depicts the coldness and the emptiness of European castles without directly mimicking them structurally. It set the mood for the cold and gritty themes of the movie without having to be overtly angsty and gothic. The angularity of the shots in this movie is so very, very well done. Many times the camera work utilizes the negative space in order to generate this sense of being trapped or being boxed in. The black and white film further emphasized the starkness of the shadows and the lights, adding more to the sense of watching a theater performance. The theater performance it was always intended to be. Director Joel Cohn truly did something wonderful when he created this movie. He managed to create a film that stayed true to the original Shakespearean roots and direction while creating an identity of its own.